Hello, today I'm going to be showing you how to paint a Tyranid Hormigaunt, just like this, in this sort of style, using a minimum of paints and equipment, mostly using contrast paints. Alright, so let's begin by going over what tools you will need to do this. Obviously you're going to need paint and paint brushes, so we'll start with the paint brushes. I would recommend a number 2 round brush, something like this, and some type of floofy, like a makeup style brush would be good. I would caution against going as big as this. You can find these all at Hobby Lobby or on Amazon, and once you get as big as this, it can become unwieldy, especially for getting into small areas like the face, but we'll go over that later. You also don't need any fancy Hobby Lobby brushes. You can get some off of Amazon, a cheap value pack, which should do just fine for your needs. Alright, you also need some water and something to hold the water, typically a cup. In this case we have a Citadel pot. I would also recommend, you don't absolutely need, but I would recommend a paint handle. This is a fancier red grass one. However, you could also use something like a cork. You stick it on there and then you can paint away. Not an absolute necessity. Of course you can hold the base and do that, but you don't really want to be touching the paint if you don't have to, and it's just more ergonomic to do it with a handle. Something else you might need is a pipette. Or some type of squeeze bottle that can, especially if you're using these Citadel style bottles, something that can suck the paint out and then distribute it on a palette, which is something that will hold your paint. Palette doesn't have to be something as fancy as this. It can be a paper plate or, a plastic lid, something like that. But anyway, if you're needing to mix paints, which we might in this tutorial, you want a pipette that will be able to get in there and do either precise drops or whatever. You don't need anything fancy like a pipette. Obviously you can get pipettes from Hobby Lobby or Amazon, but you can also just as easily use a straw, or maybe not as easily, use a coffee stirrer. There's also these small like homemade dropper bottles available, which are somewhat useful as well. So let's go over the paints that we're going to need. We'll just go left to right, I guess. We'll do Army Painter War Paints Jungle Green, Army Painter War Paints Skeleton Bone, Citadel Contrast Color Plague Bear Flesh, Citadel Contrast Space Wolves Gray, Citadel Contrast Shyish Purple, and Citadel Contrast Technical Contrast Medium. This isn't technically a paint. It's more of the magic sauce, or whatever you want to call it, that makes contrast paint. So in theory you could buy a bottle of this and just mix normal paint into it. I haven't tried that. Some on YouTube have. That might be worth looking into if you want a more budget option. Citadel paints are obviously somewhat expensive. On Amazon they're, at the time of this video filming, around $9, almost $10 per bottle, which is a bit egregious. However, I don't have any with me, but Army Painter does have their new speed paints, which, if we're going to be honest, is a direct competitor to Citadel's contrast line. Obviously many of the more popular YouTubers have done reviews of those if you wish to investigate further. For now I'll just cover what colors, or what the colors are called on the Army War Painter speed paints line, what they're called there, so you can pick those up if you just want to pick up these colors. So the Citadel, or the Army Painter speed paint equivalent of Shyish Purple is Hive Dweller Purple, kind of aptly named for the current model. The speed paint equivalent of Space Wolves Gray is Runic Gray, and the speed paint equivalent of Plague Bear Flesh is Malignant Green. Obviously, Speed Painter has their own, I think they just call it Speed Paint Medium, which is similar to this. So I have Citadel Contrast available, so that's what we're going to use. Okay. You might also want some type of paper towel. It could be even toilet paper or tissue, something to clean the brushes off in between colors at some point. This is also going to come in handy for dry brushing, depending. You may also want a little bit of water. Obviously, this is going to be a rinse water, but you may want like maybe a small dropper bottle's worth of water, or even just a water bottle. Something that you can pipe, maybe a drop or two of water in if you really need to thin your paint for anything. We technically shouldn't for this application, but some people prefer to, so we'll do with that. Okay, so before we begin painting, we're going to assume that you're starting from a gray model. You just put it together, freshly cemented, and what you may or may not know is that sometimes Citadel models come with a release agent to help it unstick from the mold at the factory. So what I would recommend is, if you didn't wash them before you assembled it, I would take your finished gray model and just take some dish detergent and maybe like a toothbrush and some water and just quickly set it up real quick and then hose it down and kind of pat it dry. That should work, and obviously make sure it's dry before you prime it. Speaking of primer, I don't have it here because I'm literally sitting in a hotel and I can't spray paint in a hotel room. You will, at least for contrast paint applications, your probably best bet is going to go for an all-white primer. Obviously, there are fancier priming techniques, zenithal, stuff like that. We won't cover any of that today. But this was primed using just Rust-Oleum flat white. I believe it was satin, but either way, you don't want a gloss. That's what I'm trying to get at. Maybe there's an argument for making gloss flow better, but I've always just used satin or flat. I will say the Rust-Oleum comes out of the can quite thick, which is problematic for preserving the tiny details on the Citadel models. Also, it can come out quite uneven and bumpy. You can kind of see how the speckling is there, and that doesn't always interact well with contrast paints. Contrast paints work by seeking out like grooves, crevices, stuff like that. And when you have bumps and texture on there, the contrast paint is going to naturally want to accumulate around those little bumps. Maybe that's an effect you're going for, but that's typically not what we're looking for today. So the alternative to that, I would say, is to use maybe the Army War Painter matte white, or even the Citadel, I think it's called Corax white or something like that. The Citadel costs are egregious for paint. It's like $22 for a spray paint can, which is excessive. Rust-Oleum is obviously like $5 a can, $6. I think the Army War Painter spray paints are like $13, which is a bit more easier to stomach. So, okay, enough of that. All right, so what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna clear off everything that we're not using. Side note, I guess you may want some matte white or whatever you're going to use. Obviously, sometimes you can use like a sand color instead of a white as a primer. You may just want to keep a bottle of that around in case you want to touch up any mistakes. Maybe that's not important to you, but we'll keep this around just in case I mess it up. So we're gonna move all the stuff that we're not using off, and I might bring some of these back in later on just to show that you actually can use them with a more budget option. But for now, we'll just focus on what we're actually using. Okay. Go back here, you bastard. All right. Okay, so we're gonna do that there. My brush has dried out, so that's probably irresponsible of me. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep everything in frame here so you can sort of see what I'm doing, but I have a limited workspace. So the first thing we're going to start with is the base coat. Now, there's a couple ways of doing this. Obviously, we could paint it straight out of the pot with just a straight purple, and the Citadel contrast purple is quite dark. You can see here, both of these are done with just straight out of the pot shyish purple. And they're pretty dark. Yeah, they're pretty dark. What you can also do is using your pipette, you can kind of mix these two together to try to thin the paint out. And what that will accomplish is, if I still have a model around here somewhere, I do actually, yep. Okay, so what that can accomplish is you can get a brighter purple. So in this case, it was mildly thinned, you know, it's thinned out quite a bit actually, and then this was not as much. But you can see how it's not nearly as almost near black as the original one was. So it's your preference. We'll do a little bit of dilution just to show you how to do it, so it's not as intimidating, and then we'll paint it from there. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so the key with, especially with contrast paints in particular and speed paints, is all paints have some type of detritus and components that it starts to separate over time. Not a big deal. You just shake the bejesus out of it and make sure it's well mixed. Some Citadel paints require a lot more mixing than others, particularly any type of white, like apothecary white contrast paint typically requires quite a bit of mixing. You can also purchase small ball bearings that you can put inside your pots that will help. They call them agitators, that will help them mix the paint. It should be noted that if you buy this is obviously isn't a speed paint, but this is old Army War Painter bottle. If you buy the speed paints from Army War Painter, they will have a ball already inside for mixing, and they will come in a dropper bottle just like this. The Army War Painter dropper bottles are nice if you intend to mix colors, because you can precisely, you know, one drop, two and drop, two drop. You can kind of come up with your own little formula. Here we're going to be kind of eyeballing it a little bit. We're playing a little fast and loose. That's fine. It'll be all right. Okay. So let me get another pipette here, so we're not contaminating our pots. We'll also get these out of the way. Alright, we'll put all this stuff over there. That way it's accessible at least. Alright, we'll put that over there. Over there. Okay. So we're gonna start with some contrast medium, I think. So we'll shake the shit out of this too. Bejesus, excuse me. Okay, so we'll shake it. Now, the Citadel paint pots, they typically have a lip here. A lot of people kind of don't like the should talk into. A lot of people kind of don't like the Citadel. Ooh, that's a bit too much. Citadel pots, because one, they're prone to spilling, and two, it doesn't particularly seal all that well sometimes. My personal opinion on that, we're gonna do 3. We'll do 4 drops. We'll make it really light. My personal opinion on that is people sort of don't really push down well on it. So, like for example, if you do it like that, it kind of looks shut, but the back of the bottle isn't. So you really want to squeeze it down a bit to make sure it's snapped in there. But this can, even with a solid snap, sometimes you can, especially with like Nuln Oil is a little bit notorious for this. You can see here, you get like a ring of paint in there and it starts to get all gunky. It's not as fun. So yeah, we'll do that there. All right, and now next for the Shire Purple, let's make a little agitation real quick mix. Let's wipe up our little spillage. Okay. Alrighty. There we go. As you can see, there's a nice rich purplish color right there, and you could, when we're going to be painting here shortly, I'll be tipping my brush there until that runs dry, and then I'll be going straight inside. Oh, okay. Ooh, okay. Easy. Well, actually, I won't be, because we'll be using this right here. I didn't even think of that. That's okay. We want 3 and 3, I believe. And I'm going to use the pipette here, and we're gonna mix that up. Now it's going to look real dark. Maybe I shouldn't be using this pipette to do it, because it'll just make it even darker, but we'll do that. It's going to look real dark, but it will lighten up once we get on the model. It's sort of the reason why you want such a solid white primer, is it really helps the contrast colors shine through. So we'll talk in paint here. Contrast colors work by, I don't know the chemistry behind it, but it's almost like it has a specific viscosity, a thickness to it, where some parts of the paint will naturally flow into crevices and others will stay on the surface, and that will give you a natural variation in shade. Now, a note about brushes, I'm probably not all that good about it, but you shouldn't be loading is what they call it. You shouldn't be having paint all the way up to the ferrule or the base of the hairs. You want it sort of in the front. I'm admittedly not as good at it. I'm still quite new. So just keep that in consideration. Now, when we're brushing here with the contrast, we want nice, I was told at least by a Games Workshop employee, to always drag down with the brush. Apparently the contrast paint likes to flow down, so we're going to try to maintain a nice downward pull. Now we're going to try to avoid here the back plates. So as you can see here, all the back plates and the slicey bits, so like the hooves and these talons up front. We'll be going with that. Now I typically will try to brace both of my fingers like this. You know, I'm doing it like this here on here, so I have maximum steadiness that I can. Obviously, for painting on the video, that's not ideal. So I'm going to have to hover a bit, and my hands may not be as steady as they should be. Now, if you really wanted to get fancy, I suppose you could paint the joints or even these little like grill marks here a different color. That's a much more delicate required operation. But it's doable. It just, how much time do you want to commit and put to it? Ooh, see, now we got a little bit of a spill over there. We might fix that in a little bit. We might not. We might just leave it. Okay, so we're just putting it on there. Not too thick, you know, just nice even flow. Now, you can see it sort of accumulate, and obviously in the areas where it's darker, it's going to be dark when it dries. And sometimes on wide flat surfaces like the tail here, it'll accumulate on flat surfaces. This is called, I don't know if it's the official term for it, but it's I can't say it, colloquially called the coffee stain effect. So that might be something you want to avoid. I'm not all that experienced with contrast paints. If we're going to be honest, this is my first week actually sort of using them, so maybe I'm not really qualified to be making such a tutorial, but for the purposes of today's model, it's good enough. So yeah, the coffee stain probably won't be a factor on Tyranids because they're very organic, and if it's splotchy, maybe it's just a pattern on their hides or carapaces or whatever you want to call them. So there's that. So now we're also going to get underneath here. Now, obviously the primer here, everything's all white, and this is on the bottom anyway, so most people won't see them, but some people who are more particular and maybe want more drastic shadow can look into something called zenithal priming, and that's going to be priming using a darker color and then a lighter color misted on top. Sounds more complicated than it is. Obviously it's not necessary for today, but if you are looking to maybe put a little more oomph on it, that's somewhere to start looking. There's plenty of videos on YouTube from people who are much better at it than I am, and we'll show you how. So throughout today's video, I'll be maybe filling in a little bit here and there, a little bit of extra stuff that you can be doing. Obviously we won't be doing it today because the goal of this is to basically have as basic as possible of a paint job. Something that, you know, 3-4 colors, slap it on, and you can put it on the table when it looks okay, and you can play with it and it looks better than gray, and it looks better than if you, say, went to Hobby Lobby and bought whatever Vallejo paint they have there and just didn't thin any of it and just slapped it on the model. And I've done that. It doesn't look terrible, but it's not the best. Okay, so now we're getting on the insides here. I'm trying to make sure that you all can actually see what I'm doing, because I have a tendency to naturally want to tuck this into me and trying to keep control over it, so I have to make sure to keep it over by the corner of this here board. So yeah, so we've got a nice little purple guy. As you can see, with us thinning it out, not nearly as dark as how it would have looked coming straight out of the bottle. So now the game plan here to paint this guy, at least the strategy, is we are doing all of the like hide / skin first, because it's the most surface area essentially. So for raised portions like this guy here, as you can see how he has these little bones, you can just take the side of the brush and just lay it perpendicular like this and just gently drag it along, and then the brush will only pick up the raised portion. But you know, we're gonna get a little sloppy here. I don't think the little mistake we made earlier here, I don't think we'll clean that up. I want this to be pretty beginner friendly. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. It will definitely make the video take longer, because we'll have to wait for that white paint to dry once we clean it up, but I think maybe we just leave it, it'll be okay. Okay, let's make sure we get everything in here. We want to get all these inner parts back inside is sometimes quite difficult to get at. For example, the base of the tail over here. Well, we actually haven't done this whole side of the tail, so maybe we should just handle that first, huh? Okay, so and then to avoid the same sort of mistake we made last time, let's make sure our brush isn't too fully loaded, but you can kind of see how there's a natural line. You can just kind of drag the tip of the brush like that. Much better, see? And yes, excellent. Okay, now what we can also do here, you can take the narrow tip of the brush and sort of poke it through these little guy's holes here, and that will help segregate the little spinal bits. Well, we've accidentally painted over one. Maybe we will have to clean it up a bit. Yeah, we'll go through from the other side as well. This is sort of why, I mean, I'm not going to take credit for this. I found it from YouTuber Miniac. He said he preferred a number 2 brush, and I was like, well, seems like he knows what he's doing. So I tried it out, and it's a nice, good size where you can apply quite a bit of paint to an area if you need to, but you can also kind of get into little tight spaces like we just did. Okay. So last bit we have the paint here is the head. And we're going to be doing, not the entire head, we'll leave his little crown pieces. What I like to do here is if there's a delicate area I know I have to hit, so for example, the plates here, I'll get that area first and then I'll paint the rest. Now, you see how when we did this here, these white dots didn't fill in. This is obviously your prerogative whether or not you want to fill in, but that's going to be our eyeballs later, and having those white will help make whatever color you put in that hole pop. So we'll probably end up putting our lime green in those whole colors. Worst case scenario, if we paint them over with, we can take a lighter color such as the skeleton bone, or if we have a white available, a matte white, and just dot them in there and then just do whatever is on top of it. But we'll see if we can leave that like that. That way it's just less overall work. So yeah, I'm gonna try to do this here. This is very unusual way to hold the brush for me personally. I'm much more to the ground type. I have to hold it away from me so the camera will see. Yeah, okay. So, now you see in this certain spot right here near his head, like we didn't quite get the spray paint coverage that we wanted to, and that's fine. It'll be okay. But I should have noted earlier with the spray paint, while you're priming, hold the spray paint can as far as feasible away from the model as you can, and very light sprays. Don't go right on it. It'll just drown out the stuff. Just, you know, a good hand distance away, and missed it is a good description, I guess. So for this part of here, I'm going to have to, you might not be able to see, but I'm trying to stick my brush into this area here, and it's a little bit difficult for me to film that. Oh boy. Oh, we seem to have slathered some around. And now, of course, if this doesn't turn out as dark as you'd like it, one, you could wait for it to dry and put another coat on. However, if you're using Army Painter speed paint, that could take quite some time. With the contrast, it dries pretty fast. I quite like that. But however, you know, there's pros and cons to it with the Army Painter speed paint. The fact that it doesn't dry, if you ever want to like mix colors or blend them on the model, it's a bit of a more advanced technique. It's useful for that. So you can also, of course, since this is a diluted version of our purple, you could just take some straight more purple out of the pot, or just mix a little bit more purple into our thing here. So okay, so let me take a gander at this guy and make sure that we've got all the spots we need to covered. We didn't miss anywhere. Okay, a little bit of armpitage. In the jaw. Gotta get the jaw a bit more. Got the shaky hands. Oh, get the little fingies. Okay. Oh, missing a bunch on the tail. All right. I think I will correct the little over drips that we did on this side here and on the tail end here. It shouldn't any more time because I'll just be able to dab it on there, and then while it's drying we can do other things like the claws and stuff, and I think it'll be good in case you do feel the need to do so. Oh, see, we got some on the claws here, so yeah, we'll definitely need to clean some of that darker stuff up, because it will sort of affect the paint that we want to do for the claws. So, yikes. Okay, we'll definitely have to clean all this up now. All right, and we'll just bring it right up to that hoof-looking thing there. Oh, back of his leg. Excellent, excellent. Oh my. Gotta remember, bring it up in the camera. Okay. All right, so I think our handsome gentleman here is fairly well painted. It's a bit splotchy. That's fine. It's a nice effect for a Tyranid, but maybe you might want it a little bit smoother for something a little bit more prim and proper, like a Space Marine or something. So that's fine. All right, so we're just gonna we'll say that's of course, as soon as I rinse it, I spot a spot that I missed. So, okay, come on, get in there. See, now it's also a problem with, I don't want to say a problem, but it's something to be aware of with the contrast paint is if you rinse your brush and then suddenly have to reapply it, it might not want to, might not as readily be absorbed in the brush because the brush is already full of water. Or rib cage. Come on, get in there. And maybe sometimes you do want a little thickly load it and slap it in there because it's hard to reach the inside areas. Oh yeah, that's our dude. Okay, so we'll leave him there for a second, and we'll rinse this off. I'll go ahead and I got a little bit of toilet paper here that I'm going to clean the brush out with. It's not as clean as it should be, but it is what it is. It'll work for our purposes. Okay, so we got a little bit of white here. Normally you'd thin this. I probably won't actually for this case. I'll try to just be very, very careful with it. And make sure. Basically, if you thin it, it might require more coats. I really not trying to waste anybody's time here, so. Although it may not seem that way. Okay, we'll give it a little bit of stir. Get a little bit on the tip of the brush. Okay, this is going to require a little bit of precision work. Okay, let's stop being Mr. Shaky. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so. Sorry, I'm blocking the camera. But I might have blocked it there, I couldn't tell. But I just kind of needed to tuck it in a little bit to better see what I'm doing, especially when I'm doing some type of precise work like this. We'll get a little bit more on here. Okay, so now we're going to be getting into much more, we'll say, fine brush work, I suppose. So you can see here, we cleaned up the back spaces here, and we kind of brushed the top. Now the way I did this here, in case you have to do it, is same way we did that little eye part I told you about earlier. You just kind of get the edge of the brush. You just want to do a little bit, just a little bit, just a little bit. You know, just take the edge of the brush, and it's almost like you're if you took a pencil and made like a rubbing of like an etched stone, like that. So we'll clean all that white off. Excellent. Pardon my toilet paper bill. Okay, so that's the purple done. Make sure that's sealed there. So what do we want to do next? So I suppose next we should do the well, since we just touched that up, we'll leave that to dry a bit. We'll do our hooves and acid stuff next. So for that we'll need plague bearer flesh and jungle green. Now there's a, and in this case we won't need this for a little bit, so we'll just move it off to the side. There's a variation of the way you can do this. You can do this. We'll do obviously one coat of this on each of the claws, and that'll give us a nice, it won't be a bright green, but kind of like a sickly green, and that'll be a nice little undercoat. And then we'll be taking the jungle green, and there's a couple ways you can do this. You can kind of add a little bit of water and kind of meld it in with this color here, the paler green, and it'll kind of make a, well, you'll see. We'll do one claw one way and one the other. Basically, you can either use this straight out of the bottle, or you can thin it a bit for a different effect. Straight out of the bottle is going to come very gobby-like, and you're going to get these sort of, you know, it looks kind of like actual acid just sitting on there. All right, so we're going to shake the shit out of this. Okay, let's get going. Okay, now you can see that sickly. And now this is going to look almost, I don't know how to describe it, but you'll see. Okay, so let's make sure that you can actually see what I'm doing here. And we'll just, now with this, it's a much thinner color, as you can see. So maybe you want to load the brush up quite a bit. You know, normally the contrast paints, it's kind of hit or miss as to what's got a ton of coverage and what doesn't. So like the Shyish purple that we used previously has, straight out of the pot, an incredible amount of coverage. It will really lay down paint if you let it. And so for this, it's not as bad, you know. And here, you know, you see we have some of the bone, where the bone meets where the blue purple is. We can just sort of meld those together and just paint right over it, and it kind of gives this, kind of ties it together to where, you know, it doesn't look as so abrupt of a color transition. It looks a little bit more natural, so we'll paint it on here as well. Nothing fancy. And hopefully by the time we work our way around, all of these will be dry. Now, alternatively, since we have this color out and you're already getting it if you're following this guide, or its equivalent from speed paint, something I should note, obviously we ignored it for the simplicity's sake, but the mouth you could have left primered and then just force fed that paint in there, and it will make it look like a nice sickly color, and maybe, you know, help differentiate the jaw and the mouth. I might show that on another model towards the end of the video, but I won't burden you now with that. I have a little guy here with quite the tongue on him. As you can see, I've been experimenting with a little bit of other color that we might be able to try. So we'll see how that turns out towards the end. But that's all bonus content, we'll call that. And so, not something you necessarily need to stick around for. Now, see here, you can see here how our primer wasn't fully applied, and you can kind of see the difference in how it affects the contrast. So contrast is very, very dependent on what color is underneath it, which is why techniques such as like zenithal highlighting or pre-dry brushing or shading before can be so effective. But we're keeping this simple, and so this is all we're going to go with. We're just going to make sure that it's actually all covered. We'll get this little guy right there. Yep. Okay, looks good. We're going to let that sit to dry for a little bit. And while we're doing that, while that's drying, we'll do the back scales, and then we'll finish off with the acid effect on this is a bit of taking a bit of liberty with that term, but yeah, we'll finish off with the bright green, and then we'll do the dry brush, and then it'll be done. Okay, so now we're moving on to Space Wolves Gray. Now, something I should note for Space Wolves Gray. Oh, see, look at that. Not closed. So, Space Wolves Gray is going to give us this sort of effect, a darker gray. If you wanted something lighter, you could do Apothecary White, which is, I don't know how well it comes across on the camera, but it's sort of a much whiter white, but it's a little bit splotchier. So, Apothecary White. It's another contrast paint. Looks like this. Obviously, it looks like more of a gray, but this one you really need to shake the shit out of it to mix it. And we'll go ahead. It's not. You can sort of tell how mixed it is by looking at the bottom here. And sometimes, if a paint's been sitting quite some time, you'll see an entirely different. It'll like separate almost, and you can sort of like see that here. How there's a separating layer. But we'll just shake that out of it. Again, a steel ball or small ball bearing or whatever put inside can really accelerate this process. And again, with the Space Wolves Gray, we can also thin this out just like we did with the purple here. So we might actually try that a little bit here. I'm kind of curious to see what sort of effect you'll achieve. I just cannot clean that out, so we'll just get. This is actually okay. This is a perfect time to demonstrate this. So say you don't have a fancy pipette, right? Say you want to put a little bit of this Space Wolves Gray on your palette. What you can do here is, obviously this is a little bit of a physics principle. You, with your finger or thumb off the top, plunge it in however deep you need it, plug it, and when you lift it out, you have a load of paint ready to go. And in this case, we'll probably just, there we go, we got a little bit there, and drop the rest back in. We'll set this off to the side somewhere where it's not going to cause a problem. So we'll close that for now, and then we'll take our contrast medium. I'm just curious to see what sort of effects this produces. And hey, this is a perfect opportunity to show you, hey, maybe we can, this is obviously the most painstaking way to do this, but it's certainly doable, where you can sort of use it. Obviously a normal coffee stirrer would work for this as well. So this is absolutely painful. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, it's doable. Not easy, but it's doable. We'll just grab a little pipette here. Again, this is a little bit of an experiment on my part. I'm just curious. Oh boy, it's been much more than I needed. Boop, 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 boop. What I think I'm going to do is, for this one, I will paint, we'll say we'll paint the head scales, this fancy diluted color, and then we'll do the back plates in a little bit of a more traditional Space Wolves gray. Okay, so we got a little bit of mix going on here. We'll see how pale this actually gets. Oops. All right. Get back in there. Okay. Let's put all that aside. Move these guys out of the way. Okay, here we go. Okay, so again, with the contrast color, you're dragging down, or at least that's what the Games Workshop employee told me. Oh my. Okay, our brush is quite dry. So in this case, it's sort of putting just a mild bluish tinge to the scales, maybe giving a little bit of a depth of color, and that's fine. It's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe we can lay it on a little bit thicker, you know, and we could really get those shadows going. I think that looks quite interesting, actually. Well, enough of that. We will quickly mix this up, and now we'll show you the actual undiluted, pure Space Wolves gray. Give it another mix again. Okay, and so for here, we will be directly taking it out of the pot lid, and again, trying to drag down, and as you can see, this is a much dirtier color than what we just used, and that is the effect of the medium. It's certainly interesting. I would love to try to experiment and maybe use normal paints and see if you can sort of make a pseudo or impromptu contrast out of normal paint. I think some people have done that on the YouTube, as I said before. Now, here's a situation we have here. You have quite a bit of paint here, and if you want, you can obviously dab some of the paint off of your brush and just kind of touch it to it, and it will soak that paint up, and we can just then drag that to where it's needed. For the no, we got a little bit of purple in there. A little bit of purple nurple. I want to do that. Okay, and we'll continue down with the spikes. Be careful here not to have too much bleed over. I mean, we want some to mix. I also want to be able to tell that there's actual tail stuff there. So I think that looks quite well. Actually, quite good. We'll try to drag a little bit more, maybe. Yeah. I want to put a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Just get a little bit more shadow going there. So you can sort of see how drastically, and obviously we didn't do a great job covering that up. So we might put a little bit of a quick little purple on there, and then we'll down to our last two steps, which will be the acid green, and then our overall dry brush, and then it's done. Optionally, you could varnish the model, which is just like you would varnish a deck. It seals the paint on there and protects it from scratches and stuff. So now this is going to be much darker because it's straight out of the pot, shyish purple. It's just fine. Looks quite good. Oh my, there's a whole section missing back there. Let's go ahead and fix that up real quick. And maybe you'll see the effect here of completely since we're mixing some of the darker purple on the model at some points. So, all right, that's done. All right, on to the lime green effect. And for this, we'll bring our palette back, because there's two different methods I will show you. Again, shake the shit out of it. One is going to be a sort of a diluted jungle green, and then one is going to be it straight gobbing it on. So we'll start with the diluted version, and then we'll do the gobbing on version. So for this situation, we'll have a little bit right here. This will be our undiluted, and then we'll have some in here. When I put like, I think 3 or 4 dots maybe. Well, that'll be enough. Put that in there. Grab a pipette. Infinitely useful. We'll take some, that's what I've been drinking out of. I'll take a little bit of this water here. You can also do this from the faucet. We'll just do 1, 2, maybe 3. And this is sort of like, again, I don't want to overwhelm you with terms, but for those of you who are not maybe looking to get a little bit more advanced, you can see how this is a bit more watery. It's almost like a watercolor. This is sort of getting into what we would call a glaze, which is like a very thinned out paint that is has a lot of see-through component. Now see here, this isn't really quite dry yet, so there is that. So we'll start somewhere where it isn't so. So as you can see here, we got a bit of a glaze going on. Glaze, just like glazing a donut. It all makes sense. It's not scary or intimidating. Now maybe when we put this on there, you'll like the more subtle effect, and maybe you want to keep, once it all dries, and you'll want to keep that way. It's something worth experimenting with. Obviously you can mix and match and try different quantities of water versus paint, and you want to get really fun with it. I mean, if you're painting Tyranid army, there's going to be a ton of models you have to paint, so you might need want to experiment a little bit to try to keep yourself from going insane. Okay, so in the meantime, we'll show you the gobbing effect, and the gobbing effect is, now I'm really taking like straight up raw, quite a bit of paint here, and we're just basically dabbing it on to the claw. And then what we're going to do is, once it's dabbed on, we're going to smear it around a bit, and we're kind of want like downward strokes sort of here to make it look like it's dripping, and because we want to keep enough paint to actually do it to the other side. Oh, just gobbing it on. Now it's going to look pretty ugly. This paint will all dry and will sort of smooth out, and it'll give us the splotchy effect that we got here. Okay. And so let's do that to the other claws and teeth and stuff like that. We'll just do that to the hubs. Okay, we'll maybe mix some of that back into our glaze paint here. We'll glaze this hoof a bit. Maybe that'll end up looking a bit better than it does. We'll just keep one side diluted and one side not diluted. We'll see what happens. We'll see what it looks like. Okay, so this is it mostly done. So now at this point in time, we're essentially ready to dry brush. Stuff's still wet though, so we're gonna let this dry a bit. And in the meantime, while it's drying, we'll take a little bit more of our lime green, and we'll do the eyes real quick. And maybe this will help later on, because the dry brushing is basically like, you'll take a floofy brush and you'll just very, very lightly just kind of fluff it over. And what that's going to do is it's going to pick up all the raised edges on the model. And since our little eyeballs here have raised edges, perhaps it will line them the lighter color, and it'll help highlight those eyes. You see now we're just sort of dabbing it in there. Nothing very fancy. There's already a little well in there that they kind of settle in, so it works out. And obviously while we're waiting to dry, I may shut off the camera quickly and hopefully figure out a way to edit it in on just a phone. But I kind of like the way that looks. It looks pretty good. You're gonna like the way it looked, I guarantee it. Okay, we're just gonna let those dry now. It's coming along nicely. As you can see, our acid, whenever you gob paint on there like so thick, it's going to take a bit longer to dry. And this is obviously taking quite some time to dry as well because we had a lot of water mixed in with the paint. So and when our back shell probably up here is still drying, especially where we use a little bit more to get the better shadow. So we'll just let this dry. So now in each one of these cases, like you would have X amount of zerglings or whatever built. And so what you would do is you would do this in stages. So you would do all the purple, like purple on one model, set that model down, let it dry, purple on the next model, set it down, like purple. And then it's like an assembly line. So that works. And then so this may seem a bit tedious waiting for this to dry like this, but typically while this is doing, I would set this aside and we'd be doing a whole nother model. And maybe we'll do that right now. So I'm going to pop this guy off here and we'll set him over to the side. And what we're going to try is a little bit of highlighting, I think. Yeah. I like that idea. All right. So we're going to take, again, this is not required, but we're going to take this guy here a little bit and we'll pull up out there. We'll see if we can't get his teeth seized. Come on. Let's see how this looks. He looks properly sick-like. I think it looks quite good. You can see in there we've just kind of sort of painted. And I think it looks pretty nice. And then what I'm probably going to do is take a little color that we haven't mentioned before and maybe try to put it on his tongue or something. But even just doing that will look pretty good. Yeah, if you wanted, you can take the skeleton bone, which I'll show you right now here on another model here. We'll show you how you can sort of like highlight the teeth. We're still waiting for the other model to dry. We're going to need some time. Skeleton bone is the final color that we're going to be using for the dry brush anyway, so we need to get it out anyway. So okay, so this is skeleton bone. Now, you don't need skeleton bone. Theoretically, you could use just a straight matte white. There's a YouTuber, Dana Howell, obviously that's quite the fan of a color called Pale Sand by Vallejo for dry brushing. And she's got a point. It does look quite good. So I tried to find a Pale Sand equivalent, and this is skeleton bone. It's good enough. You can also mix like a white in like a gray to make a very like, or even if you can find a very, very light gray, you could use that as well. Okay, so let's show a little bit of something here that you can, while that's still drying. We'll take just a teeny bit on the tips there. And we'll just do you just kind of like you're brushing his teeth, like, you know what I mean, like just a little bit on the edge. That's fine if we get it on his mouth. And then same here, just brushing the teeth, like a Tyranid at the dentist, just brushing the teeth. Oh boy, far too much. And see, this is something that, you know, you could come back, you want some contrast color paint once this is dried and fix it. But yeah, I think that makes it quite interesting effect. And then if you wanted to, you can sort of, oh man, that looks kind of ugly, to be honest. But you could fill that in with a brighter color, and maybe make his tongue look a little bit highlighted. So we won't actually need this brush anymore at all. I'll set that to the side. Still waiting on this guy to dry though. It's taking quite some time. Again, when you gob this much paint on there, it's sort of to be expected. You can also feel it, and it's clearly very, very sticky still. So we'll leave it be for now. Yeah, I don't know what to talk about now. Yeah, I think I might actually stop the video, and then we'll see how that works. All right, and we're back. After the judicious application of an air conditioner, we are maybe not fully dry, but certainly not fully wet either. So, dry brushing. The final part, and the part of this is probably going to have quite a bit of substantial impact on the end of the model. So here we have, some of the skeleton bone on the palette. Now we're going to take our dry brush and we're going to smear it around. The point of this is to get it thin again, almost dry. And then you can sort of try and see, this is too much, way too much. And you can sort of take your towel here and just kind of thin it out here a bit, and then you can test it again on your palette. You just want it to just barely leave a hint of paint. See how it's sort of on the raised edges? That's sort of what we want here. We'll just get a little bit here. We'll try it again here, and then okay. So I think we're in a good consistency there. Here again, careful with it, especially with your first part. We're just gonna rub it just like that. Now, this paint job was quite a bit splotchy, I'm gonna be honest. So maybe it's not going to pick up the raised edges as well, and it's going to make the overall model a little bit more pale as well. So maybe we'll see a little bit more of a dramatic effect here. Again, it should be picking up those raised edges, which it appears to be a little bit. And obviously just trying to load the brush back up a bit here. The more detail, the more that it's gonna, like, the more grooves and bits and stuff. So you can see, like, here on the knee and like on the edge of those carapaces. Oops, oh my. So you can see on the edge of the carapaces, like there, and on the knee and such, over like the tips of these, it's picking up quite a bit. And now we'll try to get it on the head here. The head should have a load of detail that the dry brush will pick up, and maybe we need to put a little bit more paint. I think we maybe made it a little too dry, huh? It's going to be subtle. It's not going to be slap you in the face obvious. I mean, it can be. How do I put this? I'm probably not making much sense here. It's fairly low effort, at least in my opinion it is. Sometimes I've tested on my hand here. Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, that sort of looks good. See, it is far more effective if you have a oh boy, let's see, we got a little bit too much there on the head. I might have to go back over that with some contrast. It would be a lot more obvious on a darker model, essentially. As you can see on a guy like this, obviously some of this dry brushing was a little over the top, but on something dark like that, it really made the detail edges pop. And even on our guy here, like, this is purple and it's sort of dusty looking, and maybe if some of this isn't it's a little too washed out. You can always go back over it with some contrast, but I don't know. We'll probably leave that as is. Maybe give it a little. Maybe I'm being a little too forceful here. Maybe I just don't have good technique. You can see it has an effect. It's a subtle effect. I think it's worth it. Maybe you don't. If you don't, then feel free not to. I mean, you can obviously keep just the contrast on there and it'll look all right. I just think the dry brushing really makes it pop a bit. I'm going to clean that up a bit. One last thing I wanted to maybe go over, and we can perhaps call this a bonus technique if you'd like. An alternative way to do the claws here. So we saw the splotchy method. We saw the diluted high water method. Another way we can do it here is we could take quite a bit. This is undiluted paint up here. Just make a normal piece of paint, and we can just kind of, again, taking the brush and laying it. How do I describe it? It's just flat and just like almost like you're sharpening a knife on an edge. You can kind of trace it like that. You know what I mean? Like that, and this would be called edge highlighting, and that's one way to do it. It certainly leaves a distinct line to it. And we're sort of laying it on a little thick here because the paint isn't thinned at all. That's one method you could do. It's something maybe a little spice it up. Oh, they look not that bad. They look pretty good. Yeah. Way a little bit overboard on the dry brushing on the head though, so we'll fix that real quick. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, this is done. You could throw your varnish on or whatever, and no big deal. It's whatever. Look at that shinish purple back. Oh, I guess I'm not in frame, huh? Yeah, so as you can see here, even if you go overboard on the dry brushing a bit, like perhaps on the leg here, we want a little bit more dark. It's completely doable to fix it. And maybe we want a little bit of our diluted stuff here. You can do it like that, and it's fine. Nothing super fancy. If it goes a little too far, just fix it. No big deal. You can see how it kind of brought out the oops. Come on, don't be. You can see how it brought out the jaw details there with the dry brush, and it sort of lined the carapaces. And you can see here where we have just freshly applied some stuff to clean up maybe an overabundance or zealousness of dry brushing. So yeah, I think it looks quite good. And we'll put this model on the little revolving fancy display thing here, and we'll hopefully splice that in with the other stuff. And that's a wrap, folks. All right. Thanks.